So I had a really interesting conversation just recently, and that prompted me to ask this question to you. So who, in your opinion, open banking is for? Who's the customer?
Yeah. We fundamentally think about open banking as being the democratisation of financial services. So that might mean for a consumer or for a business. So as a consumer, for example, here in the UK, one of the things that's a quiet revolution that's happened over the last year has made it just really much easier now to get access to credit, because the application process has been streamlined by the advent of open banking. That's one example. Equally though, if I think about businesses, there are some really great small business centred applications that are starting to emerge, again taking advantage of the power of open banking, and not just for transaction data access, but also starting to help small businesses manage their working capital through streamlining their payments flows. They're just two examples. There's lots of stuff going on. It's very exciting.
It is really exciting. I'm with you on that. So in your opinion, what would you say are the key ingredients for open banking adoption? The thing for tonight, what will unlock open banking? So in your opinion, what will do that?
I think maybe first, before I go into that, we think about the payments and financial services ecosystem. We've used the kind of rhetoric of the frictionless future of payments. By that we mean things like seamless, intuitive, real-time, being able to do things cross-border as easily as you can do things domestically. And an important part of that's also the inclusive agenda. It's so important that all participants in the economy can benefit from the digitisation of financial services. So we think about life in those terms, and we think open banking has the potential to improve all of those through making, for example, transaction journeys just more intuitive. I don't have to think anymore about what's the account number and the sort code. I can just click this link here to initiate a payment. Intuitively, of course, but also tied to things like real-time account-to-account payments, that real-time component. But I think probably the most important contribution of open banking to all of that is it really helps with, if it's done right from a customer's perspective, taking out some of the mystery of financial services and banking, making it just easier for people to interact with their money in ways that perhaps historically hasn't been as well served by incumbents. Clearly, from a regulatory perspective, one of the things that or an ambition of regulators in the world of open banking and PSD2 and so on is the stimulation of innovation. By enabling third parties and fintechs and whoever to double down on their investment, by making it easier for them to get access to the account data and so on that's in customers' banks. And we're starting to see that play out. And actually, we're also seeing the major mainstream banks coming to the party as well with their own services. And it's, this room is full, it's noisy, and that's, I think, symptomatic of just, what's going on.
That's really exciting. Talking about the UK, and we've seen that, and many would say that the UK has been setting the tone for the rest of the world when it comes to open banking and its implementation. However, some people may say that so far we've just seen baby steps. And so how do you get that baby walking?
I think firstly, whilst it's certainly true in Europe the UK is leading, I think if I look through a global lens, arguably the US has been doing open banking for a decade. Services like Mint and Venmo and others have been, fintech services that are powered by data resident in mainstream bank accounts. They've been doing that sort of stuff for ages. It just hasn't been called open banking, and it's arisen through market forces rather than a regulatory intervention. In a similar vein, UPI in India is just massive. It's from in 3 years kind of become the default way that lots of domestic payments in India happen. So whilst I think what's going on in the UK is great, I think it's also not the only place where there's some fabulous stuff happening. But coming back to your point, absolutely within Europe the UK is leading. I think as we exited last year, something like 200 million API calls through the UK banks in 1 month, which is up from kind of nothing at the end of 2018. And that growth is therefore significant in terms of usage. So usage is happening. We did some research in, I think it was September-ish last year, consumer research and just testing out consumer attitudes. I mean, the first thing that kind of happens with that is, you say to customers, what's open banking? And they say, open what? But when you start to engage with them on the content, willingness to share data in return for some better service, for example, it's very clear that customers are starting, at least, to be willing to consider that sort of journey. But I think a big enabler will continue to be, in every market, substantial customer education. That said, very clearly we're seeing some important things happening in the lending space. A lot of lenders in the UK are quietly changing their processes. We'll see that ripple out across all of Europe and beyond. We'll see payments starting to really happen. So far in the UK, it's all really been AISP type transactions, data transactions. What's my balance? What's my transaction history? We're just starting to see some payments use cases get going. And I think a big one in 2020 in the UK will be that. I suspect the adoption of payment services in Europe will similarly lag relative to data services, but I think that's going to be a big one. Clearly from Mastercard's perspective, given the role we play in the ecosystem, that's particularly exciting. And then I think the other trend is everywhere else in the world. I talked earlier about the US and India and so on, but if you look at other countries, multiple territories are busy in at least thinking about, if not embracing, open banking. South Korea's gone live. Turkey just talking about it the other day. Brazil, Mexico, lots of stuff happening. So I think the other macro trend is this thing becoming truly global. How we make that effective for domestic markets, but at the same time globally interoperable, is going to be an interesting challenge that folks like Mastercard are seeking to step up to.
Sounds really exciting. So that leads me very nicely to my last question. So the evenings like tonight are Open Banking Excellence evening. So how can we support that wider open banking adoption and what actually some people are now referring to as open finance?
Yeah, I mean, Mastercard's very proud to be sponsoring the OBE in these evenings. On the camera you can't see the kind of probably 200 people that are behind us. We think this sort of engagement, of a safe place for people to exchange ideas, to talk about the topic in its broadest sense, very important. And you've got people kind of, in jeans and t-shirts and guys in suits and ties behind us. Really interesting, breadth of folks that are coming along to this. Going back to what I said earlier about customer education, I think if we can use forums like this to get everyone pointed in the same direction in terms of how we talk about the general topic to all of our customers, I think that will help a lot. And I think those two things, kind of alignment of customer messaging and just a forum to come talk to each other, they're the reasons we're here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim. Thank you.